In the distant reaches of space, a distress signal is detected from Nyx-7, a planet that has been abandoned for centuries after a mysterious disaster wiped out its population. The planet's once great cities now lie in ruins, and no one knows exactly what happened. Kael Arden, a 16-year-old tech prodigy, joins a small team sent to investigate the source of the signal. For Kael, this mission is personal. His father disappeared on Nyx 7 years ago, and Kael hopes to find out what happened to him. As the expedition team lands on Nyx 7, they explore the ruins of Lunasol City, once the capital of the planet. The city is eerie, with its buildings decayed but strangely intact. As they delve deeper, Kael's scanners pick up faint signals and energy readings indicating advanced technology. The team soon stumbles upon an ancient, sealed chamber hidden beneath the city. Inside, they discover a functioning cryopod containing a girl, Tessa, frozen for centuries. Tessa awakens but has no memory of how or why she was frozen. However, she quickly proves valuable to the team, helping them navigate the ruins with fragmentary memories of Nyx-7 before its collapse. As Kael and Tessa investigate further, they realize that Tessa isn't entirely human. She is connected to the Nyxians, the original inhabitants of Nyx-7, who disappeared after an experiment went terribly wrong. As Kael and Tessa explore the depths of the planet, they uncover the truth behind Nyx-7's destruction. The Nyxians had developed a way to manipulate quantum echoes, allowing them to control time itself. But their experiments unleashed a malevolent, sentient force, a parasitic energy entity, that erases entire timelines. This entity was responsible for the disaster, and it is beginning to awaken again as Kael's team disturbs its resting place. The team realizes that the entity is starting to affect them. Time begins to warp, causing strange phenomena such as people and objects appearing from different timelines. As the entity grows stronger, members of the team start to vanish, wiped from existence. Kael and Tessa must work together to find a way to contain the entity before it escapes Nyx-7 and threatens the entire galaxy. Kael and Tessa discover that the entity has merged with the reactor core, the heart of the Nyxians' quantum technology. There is only one way to stop it. Someone must stay behind and manually shut down the reactor, trapping the entity in a time loop. Tessa, realizing her unique connection to the Nyxians, volunteers for the task. Kael tries to stop her, but Tessa insists, it is the only way to save the galaxy. With Tessa's sacrifice, the entity is sealed, and Nyx-7 becomes a tomb once again. Kael emerges from the ruins, his mission complete but his heart heavy with loss. The distress signal fades, and the planet falls silent. Kael never discovers the full truth of his father's fate, but he knows that he has helped save the galaxy from a far greater threat. The echoes of Nyx-7's past will linger forever in Kael's memory. As Kael and the team move deeper into the ruins, he begins experiencing vivid dreams of Nyx-7's past, but they are not his memories. These glimpses into the lives of the Nyxians are unsettling, making him question whether the entity is already manipulating his mind. Time warps become more frequent and unpredictable. The team witnesses entire moments from alternate realities, with different timelines briefly overlapping. They see Nyx-7 in its heyday, full of life, only for the vision to vanish in an instant. While exploring the deeper levels of Lunasol City, Kael finds an encrypted message from his father. In the recording, his father explains that he discovered the entity's existence but was too late to stop it. He warns Kael about the consequences of tampering with time and urges him to find a way to contain the entity. As Kael delves deeper, he starts hearing the entity's voice, a strange, disembodied presence that whispers to him. It tempts Kael with promises of power, showing him visions of alternate realities where the entity rules supreme. Tessa regains more of her memories and realizes that she was created as part of the Nyxian experiment. She was engineered to be a living safeguard, designed to contain the entity if it ever became a threat. Her memory was wiped to protect her from the entity's influence. Kael is briefly trapped in an alternate timeline where his father never disappeared, and Nyx-7 is still thriving. For a brief moment, Kael experiences a life without loss, but he quickly realizes it's a trick created by the entity to keep him distracted. One of the team members, Lyra, suddenly disappears. The team watches in horror as her existence is erased from their memories. Lyra fades like she never existed, leaving Kael more desperate to stop the entity before it can erase more of them. Tessa experiences a vision of the Nyxians' last moments, watching as they desperately try to contain the entity. The weight of their failure looms over her, but Tessa becomes more determined to succeed where they did not. Kael begins to doubt whether they can defeat the entity. The entity's mind games and time distortions take a toll on him, making him fear that their mission is doomed to fail. While on the run from the entity's influence, Kael and Tessa discover an unexpected ally, the digital consciousness of a long-dead Nyxian scientist. The consciousness offers them a critical piece of information about how to stop the entity, but the cost of using this knowledge could be high. The entity's goal is revealed. It plans to use the quantum reactor to create a new timeline where it controls the galaxy. It has been manipulating events from the very beginning to reach this outcome. Before entering the reactor core, Kael and Tessa share a moment of farewell. Tessa knows what she must do to stop the entity, and Kael, although heartbroken, realizes he cannot stop her. Kael faces a final decision: either let Tessa sacrifice herself to contain the entity or offer himself in her place. In a moment of intense emotion, Kael realizes that only Tessa can fulfill the task, as she was created for this purpose. Tessa steps into the reactor core, sealing herself inside and manually shutting down the reactor. As the entity fights back, she uses her connection to the Nyxians to contain the entity in an endless time loop. In its final moments, the entity attempts to drag Kael into a time loop, trapping him in an alternate reality. Kael must fight against the entity's manipulations, resisting its last attempt to pull him into oblivion. With the reactor deactivated, Kael returns to the surface alone. The planet falls silent, and the mission is complete. Kael reflects on everything he has lost but feels proud of their success in stopping the entity. As Kael returns to normal space, he notices small changes in the timeline. The effects of the entity's manipulation are fading, but Kael is left with fragmented memories of those who were erased, including Tessa. In the epilogue, Kael hears a faint signal, an echo of Tessa's voice from deep within the reactor. Whether it's just a glitch or a fragment of her consciousness, Kael smiles, knowing that she's still with him in some way. Kael and Tessa start hearing strange voices, echoes from people who no longer exist, haunting the ruins. These ghostly sounds disorient Kael and Tessa, as the line between reality and memory blurs. One of the surviving team members, Zane, betrays the group, having been manipulated by the entity. He believes the entity can grant him control over his past, but his actions sabotage their mission. As Tessa gets closer to the reactor, she begins feeling an uncomfortable connection to the entity. She struggles to resist its influence, as it tempts her with power. Kael finds himself trapped in an alternate reality where everything is perfect, his father is alive, and Nyx-7 is thriving. But he must break free from this illusion to continue the mission. The city begins to collapse, accelerated by the entity's destabilization of time. Buildings crumble, and Kael and Tessa must escape the city as it falls apart around them. Kael has a vision of a possible future, where the entity's influence has spread to Earth. It's a stark reminder of what's at stake, and he becomes even more determined to stop it. Kael and Tessa discover that the entity wasn't always evil, it was once a force of creation, but the Nyxians' quantum experiments corrupted it. As Kael and Tessa are cornered by a boat patrol, an unexpected ally, perhaps a rogue AI, helps them escape, giving them a brief moment of reprieve. Kael finds that his father left behind a device capable of stopping the entity. His father was working on a way to contain the entity before his disappearance. The entity creates a trial for Kael, forcing him to confront versions of himself from alternate realities, some who failed, some who became corrupt. The reactor core creates a rift in time, where alternate timelines converge and collide. Kael and Tessa must navigate this chaotic environment to reach the core. The entity offers Kael and Tessa a deal: if they abandon the mission, it will spare Earth. If they continue, the entity will destroy everything. After the entity gives Kael and Tessa the ultimatum, Kael is suddenly pulled into another vision, this time, a horrifying glimpse into the future where the entity has won. In this timeline, the entity spreads beyond Nyx-7, manipulating time across the galaxy. Whole planets are erased, and the survivors live in a warped reality where timelines clash, causing chaos. Kael sees himself in this future, a broken version who has joined the entity, unable to resist its influence. This vision rattles Kael deeply, forcing him to confront the worst version of himself. Tessa, meanwhile, witnesses Kael's internal struggle and realizes just how high the stakes have become. Kael feels shaken by the possibility of failing, and this scene highlights his growing fear of becoming something monstrous if he cannot stop the entity. As Kael battles his fear of the future, Tessa's connection to the entity grows stronger. She starts to feel the pull of the quantum echoes more deeply. Her unique bond with the Nyxian technology allows her to see the patterns of time, understanding how the entity manipulates the threads of reality. Tessa realizes that while the entity feeds on time distortions, she can potentially use this same power to stabilize time and fight back. However, the closer she gets to mastering this ability, the more dangerous it becomes. Tessa experiences brief lapses where she feels the entity's consciousness invading her mind, whispering promises of ultimate control over time if she embraces its power. She keeps this a secret from Kael, not wanting to burden him, but the strain is starting to show. Tessa's internal conflict intensifies as she fights between using her growing power for good or risking succumbing to the entity's influence. As Kael and Tessa move closer to the reactor core, the fabric of reality around them begins to unravel. Multiple timelines are now colliding, creating unstable rifts in space and time. Through these rifts, they witness bizarre and terrifying moments from alternate realities, Nyx-7 at war, apocalyptic worlds, even alternate versions of themselves. One version of Kael is seen working alongside the entity, while another is nothing more than a shadow, erased from time. Navigating these chaotic rifts becomes dangerous. Kael almost steps into one, only for Tessa to pull him back at the last second, saving him from being trapped in a fractured timeline. The danger of these time rifts becomes all too real when one of the remaining team members, Zane, stumbles into one. He is ripped from their reality, vanishing into an alternate timeline where his fate is unknown. The time rifts add a surreal, unpredictable danger to their journey, testing Kael and Tessa's ability to survive in a rapidly destabilizing environment. Kael and Tessa finally reach the quantum nexus, a massive central chamber that houses the heart of the Nyxian reactor. The nexus pulses with raw quantum energy, its machinery ancient yet still functional. At its center is a glowing time core, an unstable source of energy that allows the manipulation of time. This is what the entity has been feeding off of. As they enter the nexus, they find the remnants of a Nyxian archive, detailing the history of the entity's creation. The Nyxians had once tried to harness the power of time itself, but in doing so, they gave birth to the entity. It is revealed that the entity is a living manifestation of the time experiments gone wrong, growing in strength each time a timeline is altered or destroyed. Kael realizes that to stop the entity, they will have to shut down the time core, but doing so would mean erasing Nyx-7's entire timeline. This would destroy not only the planet but everything connected to it, including the echoes of Tessa's past. The weight of this discovery hits hard for Tessa, who now knows that her very existence may depend on the timeline they are about to erase. The weight of this discovery hits hard for Tessa, who now knows that her very existence may depend on the timeline they are about to erase. Before Kael and Tessa can act, the entity strikes. It has fully merged with the quantum nexus and manifests itself in the chamber as a terrifying, ever-shifting form, made of fractured time and dark energy. The entity's voice booms through the nexus, claiming it can now control every possible timeline. The entity attempts to separate Kael and Tessa, creating an illusion where Kael is once again shown a world where his father never disappeared. In this reality, Kael lives a peaceful life, free of the trauma and danger he now faces. The temptation is strong, and Kael struggles to pull himself out of the illusion. Meanwhile, the entity tries to exploit Tessa's growing connection to it, offering her the power to control time if she chooses to join forces with it. This scene is filled with intense psychological and emotional battles as both Kael and Tessa fight the entity's manipulations. In a climactic moment, Kael finally manages to break free from the entity's illusion by focusing on the people he cares about, his team, Tessa, and his mission to save the galaxy. He rejects the false reality and turns his attention back to the true danger before him. With renewed determination, Kael uses the device his father left behind, a temporal stabilizer that was designed to disrupt the entity's connection to the quantum nexus. However, Kael knows the device is only a temporary solution. It can weaken the entity but not destroy it completely. Kael's triumph over the illusion shows his growth as a character and his dedication to finishing the mission. As the battle against the entity escalates, Tessa realizes there is only one way to stop it for good. She must use her unique connection to the Nyxians and the quantum echoes to trap the entity inside the nexus permanently. This will require her to stay behind and merge with the nexus herself, ensuring that the entity remains contained forever. Kael is devastated by Tessa's decision, but she assures him that this is what she was meant for. Tessa has now fully embraced her purpose as the living safeguard created by the Nyxians. She uses her control over the quantum echoes to stabilize the nexus, sealing herself inside as the entity is locked away in an eternal time loop. This is the emotional heart of the story. Tessa's sacrifice is deeply moving, as she says her final goodbye to Kael and fulfills her destiny. With Tessa's final act of sacrifice, the entity is contained within the quantum nexus. The time distortions across Nyx-7 begin to settle, and the rifts in reality start to close. The timeline stabilizes, and the chaotic echoes of the past slowly fade. Kael watches as the nexus powers down, knowing that Tessa is now a part of the reactor, ensuring that the entity will never escape. Though the galaxy is safe, Kael is left with the overwhelming grief of losing his closest friend and the knowledge that she will be trapped in the nexus for eternity. The entity is defeated, but Kael's victory feels bittersweet due to Tessa's sacrifice. Kael returns to the surface of Nyx-7, alone but victorious. The once chaotic planet is now eerily calm, and the distress signal that originally called them there has finally stopped. With the entity contained in the quantum nexus shut down, Nyx-7 is now nothing more than a silent, forgotten world. As Kael leaves the planet, he contemplates the weight of what has happened. His father's legacy remains a mystery, and Tessa's presence is now only a memory, but Kael knows that their actions have saved the galaxy from unimaginable destruction. Back on his ship, Kael sends a report to the intergalactic government, detailing what has transpired on Nyx-7. He warns them of the dangers of tampering with time and quantum technology, urging them to leave Nyx-7 undisturbed to prevent any further risk of awakening the entity again. Kael then turns his attention to the future, wondering if the galaxy will truly heed his warning. The knowledge that the quantum nexus still exists, with Tessa and the entity locked inside, leaves Kael with a sense of unease. He knows that if anyone else attempts to unlock the nexus, the entity could be released once more. As Kael prepares to leave Nyx-7 behind, he hears a faint signal on his ship's communication system. It's barely noticeable, but Kael recognizes it instantly. It's Tessa's voice, faint but clear, echoing through the remains of the quantum nexus. The message is simple: I'm still here. Though Tessa is physically gone, her presence remains in the quantum echoes. Kael smiles, knowing that she's still watching over the nexus and the entity. With that final message, Kael departs, leaving Nyx-7 behind for good. Kael receives a message from his future self, warning him about the consequences of his decisions. He must choose whether to follow the advice or forge his own path. Tessa begins to exhibit strange abilities, using the quantum echoes to manipulate time in small ways. However, this power connects her even more deeply to the entity. As the reactor reaches critical mass, Kael and Tessa have only minutes to stop the entity before the galaxy is destroyed. Just as Kael and Tessa think they've succeeded, the entity reveals it was a false victory. They must push through this last illusion to truly defeat it. After Tessa's sacrifice, Kael discovers a fragment of her memory left in the quantum echoes. Though she's gone, Her presence lingers, guiding him,